You're watching Fish Plates and Scratch Builds. I'm Jonathan, and today I'm embarking on a brand new project. I'm about to start a new 00 gauge micro layout, and I'm going to take you along with me. So, as ever, let's take a look. That's right, a brand new layout, and I am going to chart my progress through these videos. And that was kind of the intention of this channel all along, as well as all the other things I've done. I really wanted to build a new layout and use it to show everyone a possible process, not the definitive process, but a process that you can go through to create a layout. I really love the idea of taking a tiny little slice of a world and really condensing it down. You know, you take a photo and that's a snapshot of a scene in time, and a micro layout to me is like really zooming in on one little bit in that photo. It really challenges you to think really hard about the small details, and to be really conservative in what goes into it as well without trying to overcrowd it. I think trying to make a micro layout in 00 scale is actually more of a challenge, because it's a bigger scale. You really have to think about what's going in, you really have to plan, and you really have to, I think there's a certain amount of compromise as well that has to happen. And you know what? I really love that challenge. So what I've chosen to go with, probably going pre-grouping, we're probably going kind of early 1900s. I'm thinking an industrial scene, so think sort of industrial revolution, kind of great big brick built factories. I'm thinking a canal side scene with a sort of dock. I'm thinking trains going across lines that are embedded in these wonderful cobbles, and I'm thinking a layered, tiered kind of scene as well. And what I want to base it on is a dog biscuit factory. Now, bear with me on this because that sounds absolutely crazy, but I really wanted to lean into the more playful side. And I have since seen some layouts that kind of do that, and they've really inspired me in this one. I love animals. I've always loved animals. I've grown up with them, and they're really important to me. So it's going to be a factory called Bob's Biscuits, which it's funny to me anyway. I think that just sounds fun to say. And that's because one of my previous childhood dogs, if you like, was called Bob. And there will be some other connections to things like that as well. But I thought a dog biscuit factory or dog food factory in some way was a really interesting kind of industry that maybe we don't see very much on model railways. So that's some of the basic facts out of the way. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my inspiration for this layout, because I went to a model railway exhibition in East Sussex not too long ago, and I saw a layout there that was it was N-gauge, and it was quite small. It was kind of like there were 3 different tracks on it, I think, and it was kind of rural. It was very sort of tree-lined, very forest-based. And I absolutely cannot remember the name of it for the life of me, so I do apologise, but some of you out there might know what I'm talking about. And basically, the foliage, the trees, the scenics were used to view block where the locos would go on and off the scene at either end. So it didn't have a massive dedicated fiddle yard or storage area. And now I've spoken, I think, maybe once, maybe twice about how I don't really like fiddle yards. I mean, I won't get into it today, but I feel like there's a huge amount of wasted space, but I do recognise their absolute necessity in a lot of layouts. And actually, that's probably something I would talk about again at some point with Adolford Green, because I actually designed Adolford Green not to have a fiddle yard because I didn't want it to have one. And I soon found that actually you just can't operate it, even a layout that small, without some sort of area to store your trains and to have them off scene. But this little N-gauge layout had found a way to do it. Now obviously it was very small, and the trains were nothing more than sort of 2-car diesel or electric units, and they would shuttle back and forth, but they would realistically leave the scene at either end, or one end or the other. And it really seemed to work, and I was quite mesmerised by this idea. Now, the chap that was operating it, he told me that he got the idea from someone who'd done something similar in 00. So it's interesting how the inspiration sort of carries on, isn't it? So I'm now scaling that back up to 00 in my idea. So what I wanted to take from that layout was the idea of being able to take locos off the scene, so away from the viewer, so they are not seen, but they don't go into this great big empty blank cavernous space full of other locos waiting their turn. It's all somehow part of the same whole. Now, a little word on my previous layouts. Obviously, I've mentioned Adalford Green. It's my most recent layout. It features on this channel, and it's a branch line terminus. It has some facility for shunting, but otherwise, although there's kind of a lot of scenics going on, it's not particularly layered. It's very flat. It does have a little bit of elevation here and there, but to be honest, it's very generally flat, and I don't feel like the composition of it is as good as it could be. Now, going back before that, I had another very simple layout which doesn't have a name. I just call it Roundy Roundy, and Roundy Roundy is pretty much just there to go round in a circle. But what I wanted to do with Roundy Roundy was to try and get the most interesting possible scenics out of what was a very simple track plan. So looking at both of these previous layouts, I want to combine the strengths of both of them. So I want the really interesting tiered layered approach of Roundy Roundy, and I want the operational interest of Adalford Green. So bearing all of that in mind, what I wanted from this layout, I made a little list of requirements which I'll share with you now. So first of all, I wanted to see how small could I go, and I tried to play around with different sizes, but the idea was I wanted to see just how small I could keep the whole overall layout, including any areas of storage. But as long as that was true, it also had to be operationally interesting. So the locos had to be doing something. It had to be a logic to it. There had to be enough interest that they could maybe move things around, the layout, taking them from one place to another, there being a real logic to what's going on, whilst also being a kind of layered scene. So I wanted levels from it. I wanted there to be tracks on different levels. So much like the one I saw at the exhibition, it had multiple different lines. I want to take the same theory and have multiple different trains operating at once, and I want them on different levels, different elevations. Now, I also really want to try my best at creating a very interesting composition. I want something that really draws the viewer's view into the scene. I want them to almost be pulled into it. I also want to see if I can play around with a bit of forced perspective as well. And the last thing that I want to do is, ideally, the plan was to go deep. So a lot of layouts are long. They're rectangular, they're long and narrow, because you want a length for your trains to run along, absolutely. But what I wanted to do with this one was to try, if I could, to make it square, fully square. And I'm not talking square to do a big circuit like Roundy Roundy. I mean square in the sense that I wanted it to be as deep as it was wide, which really I think breaks the mould for the typical footprint of a model railway. So those are my specifications. There they are, up on the board there. And let's see, as we go on, how many of these I can stick to with this layout, because things will change, things will fluctuate. I'll change my mind quite a lot. Not just within this video, but probably across the entire series, let's be sure of that. So let's go and have a little look at some of the track plans that I came up with, and some of the weird deliberation I had to go through to actually decide on what on earth this layout was going to be. Recently, I've been using a program called AnyRail to plan my layouts. It's free to use when you're adding up to 50 track pieces, but beyond that you need to buy a license. Now, if you're planning anything bigger than I am, it's probably worth the cost because it's a very competent program with lots of features. What has really impressed me is the range of track libraries available. You have everything here from 00 and HO to larger and smaller scales, plus pretty much every major brand's products within each scale too. There's even a section for Lego and slot cars. I've been through so many different iterations of this new layout. Let me give you a sample of the madness I've endured. So, from the beginning, I had a clear idea in mind of what I wanted. I wanted a layout that raises in distinct levels, each with its own independent running line. So, right at the bottom, it starts with a canal on the lowest level, which delivers goods to the factory warehouse. In some designs, there's also a short shuttle featuring a loco which enters or exits something like a shed as well. The midsection is the biggest area and features the main controlled train activity. Usually there's two lines here which interact with each other. There's a large factory on the right hand side called Bob's Biscuits, and the lines move in and out of the building, and the loco can shunt wagons inside and outside and onto different lines. In some plans, the second line on this level leaves the scene through the street level's retaining wall and can be accessed at the very back of the layout. Next layer up is a street level, and this is to have shops and a road and again be separated by another retaining wall. The factory will also reach up to this level as well. And finally, right at the back, I plan an eye-catching girder bridge which spans across the back of the layout, and all the buildings and scenic work around here will be designed to hide either side of this so that the loco can shuttle back and forth but be hidden from view at each end. I started by asking myself, what is the smallest layout I can get away with? And to do so, I kind of figured that I would need at least one loco and one wagon as an absolute minimum. I measured a lot of my locos and wagons and decided that 10 centimetres for a loco and 10 centimetres for a wagon was perfectly acceptable and probably a little bit over the top, but at least that would give me some margin for error. And using this measurement and a bit of playing around with track pieces, I came to the conclusion that 60 centimetres by 60 centimetres would be a good starting board size. That's about 2 foot by 2 foot. But as I started to explore track plans, I realised that actually this was far too restrictive. I just couldn't get in what I wanted to do. And the diverging lines that came off of points just didn't have enough room to really separate from one another, and everything just felt a little bit too cramped. Okay, that's fine. Let's try extending it. So next I went from 60 by 60 to 60 by 75, so only increasing it by 15 centimetres, that's about half a foot. But this extra space really helps the layout to breathe, and it really made quite a big difference in my track plan. Then, as I moved on trying to decide on exactly what the track plan was going to be, I found the mid-section to be quite a challenge, and I tried lots of different track arrangements but couldn't really decide on any one. I knew I wanted 2 separate running lines which could have locos running on them independently, and I wanted them to interact in some way. I tried a diamond crossing, which I thought was quite fun at first, but I really couldn't settle on any one design. Then I started to get the feeling that actually it's a bit too simple, and that the interactions with the locos and the operations of them just really wasn't going to be interesting enough. That's when I started to get a bit crazy, and I decided to extend the plan to 60 centimetres by 100, so that's a metre in length now. And I also started to look at including non-scenic storage areas, initially on either side. So a very small area where the odd wagon could be maybe taken off or put back on. And then eventually I changed that idea to having a non-scenic area on just the one side, even going as far as potentially planning to have a traverser on there as well. Okay, so after all this, I gave myself a good shake and I realised that I'd gone way too far from the original brief. The layout was getting bigger and bigger, and now there's a non-scenic area on my layout, which is exactly what I wanted to avoid. The entire point of the layout in the beginning was to not have any kind of fiddle yard or non-scenic area. And ultimately, by having so much of that metre space taken up with a fiddle yard, meant that actually the scenic area was reduced back down to near 60 by 60, which I had a problem with in the first place. So it's all gone a bit stupid. Okay, so let's consider reducing the board back down to 60 by 75. That seemed to work out quite nicely. And I choose to simplify the track plan, but diversify the activity, make it a little bit more interesting. And I choose to replace the diamond crossing with a wagon turntable instead. Now, this is something that I will have to build myself, and I will have to create a mechanism under the board to be able to turn it. I'm thinking probably by hand rather than by motor, because I think that would be more tactile and a bit more fun as the operator. But what this really does is it adds much more interest to how these lines can interact. They don't just cross over each other, they can physically swap wagons from one line to the next in a really interesting way for not just the viewer, but for the operator as well. Okay, this might be the final plan, might. No promises, but after much thought I have decided to keep the board at 60 centimeters deep by 100 centimeters wide. It could technically work with the smaller size, but I really am thinking that I would be making some compromises to the scenics, and I don't want to do that. I feel this is a happy balance. After all, we are looking at a micro layout here still. It's still very small, and we're looking at something which is completely operational without having that traditional non-scenic fiddle yard area. The short shuttle line at the front is gone now in favour of something else. I don't know yet, but I would like to incorporate some kind of movement at the front. I just haven't exactly decided what that will be, although I do have some ideas. And the other thing is, I wasn't really happy with so many elements on this layout being parallel to the board's edge. Now, this is something I've talked about before. I'm not a big fan of that. I like to see things at angles. I like to see interesting compositions. So I decided to challenge myself, and I decided I am going to offset everything just slightly so that we haven't got that harsh 90 degrees running through the whole board. I will regret this later. Mark my words. One of these videos I will absolutely be really angry that I've made this decision, but I'm making it now, and I will just have to deal with it. And I think in the end it will be worthwhile. Now, I'm very sure that these plans are going to change as I go along, and I'm trying to account for that. I'm trying to think of things that need to be thought of now and leaving things that can be modified later, just for full flexibility. It's given me a good enough idea of what it's going to look like to make a start on the baseboard. So let's go and look at that next. Okay, so here we are in the shed, and this is the board itself. So this is the 60 centimeters of depth by 100 centimeters or a meter in length. And what I've chosen to use is a good old-fashioned, what I've used on Adderford Green before, is 9mm plywood, so 9mm thick. And I find this is great for model railways because it's a really resilient type of wood. It generally stands up to moisture really well. It's quite resistant to forms of warping as well. And also I find the depth of 9mm just enough for mounting things underneath, like point motors, but it's also not so thick that it's adding a huge amount of weight to the layout, which I find 12mm ply certainly could. And I think anything thinner than this, fine if you're not going to be mounting anything to the underside of it, but if you want to mount something under there, like a point motor, 9 I think really is probably your absolute minimum. Other people may have other experiences, and feel free to correct me if you feel that you've had a different experience, but this is the stuff that I use. So this is my start, and I like to have this here because it's a good way to visualize what the whole layout is going to look like. Now, I'm not sure how this looks to you in YouTube land. It does look bigger to me than I envisioned, but when you think this is going to be the entire layout, there will be nothing else. There will be no extras added on the sides. There will be no fiddle yard. I'm quite happy with this. So the other wonderful thing about AnyRail is you can create a printout. I promise I'm not shilling for AnyRail in any sense. It really is just a program I quite enjoy using. But the other great thing you can do is you can print your plan out on A4 paper to exactly the same scale as it would be in real life. So here it is. This is my so far plan printed out, and I covered a lot of what the actual plan is in the last section, so I won't go over it too much. But you can see that over here, this is where the factory is going to be. Pretty much this entire side is going to be factory, and these 3 lines will go into it. It will come out maybe 15 centimeters or so, possibly somewhere here, and there will actually be room for 2 wagons to fit within it, which is another good reason for going for this size. So it will come up at least to somewhere here. We've got the head shunt up at this end, so a loco will be able to pull these wagons out of here, and we'll be able to go all the way back into here. And there's plenty of room here before the point for the wagon, for the loco, sorry, to then pull these away. We've got the wagon turntable, something like this here in this centre bit, and of course along here will be the retaining wall, somewhere like that, probably at an angle, and we can have another loco bring wagons in from this line, turn them, and then they can be either shunted straight up into the factory that way, or the other loco on the other line can take them this way and put them into any one of the other areas. And likewise, wagons can come from these areas and be shared with this one to disappear off up here. So the other great thing about being able to print this out is you can literally test your tolerances. You can check that things you're hoping to use will fit, and that there's room for everything, you know, and I can see exactly what I will need in terms of a factory building to go across here. The other reason that I stuck with this longer board is because it allows me to have a deeper factory building. When it was only going to be 1 wagon, the factory only really needed to come to here, and you can't see that very well on the camera there, but it's only about 10 to 12 centimeters. It wasn't a lot of depth, and I felt like this building has a lot of presence and it's going to be very big, and that just won't do it justice. So I felt the bigger size gives me more scenic room generally, allows me to hold more wagons at once, allows me to have a bigger, more imposing factory building on there as well. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And as I think you'll agree, it's not the world's biggest layout either. So I think I'm still sticking to that micro layout idea. So literally all this layout needs is a few different bits of track, literally 1 point, and the rest of it is all just flexi track. So it makes it incredibly simple. I have already got one of the pieces here. I bought it early to test a few things out, see how things look. This is from Pico. This is actually a code 75 Y shaped point. I've gone with code 75 for complicated reasons. Basically, and this isn't really relevant anymore, when this was going to be a diamond crossing here, the middle of the diamond on the code 100 point is plastic. The frog in the middle is plastic, and I try to avoid those like the plague because they are awful for getting small wheelbase locos over them. So I really wanted a diamond crossing that had an actual metal inner bit there, and it was only in code 75, which isn't a track I've used before, but since I've now got those pieces, even though I don't need this one anymore, I am going to stick with code 75. The rail is much finer, much more prototypical, much more realistic. Now all of this, pretty much all of it, is I plan to be cobbled. I think all of this will be under cobble, so at the end of the day, it really isn't going to matter too much exactly what this track looks like, because you're probably not going to see most of it. But that's what we're going with over here. The other thing I've done to try and get a semblance of how this is going to work is I've built this frame from some pieces of foam board. Now, you can probably tell it's too short, and this was back when I was trying out ideas for the 60 by 60, and this basically would have been the whole footprint of it. This shows kind of the relative heights of all the different areas. So down here we have our canal, and this will be against the factory building, which wall will come up to the side here, and this boat will be loading, so there'll be a winch with a crane at the top there to load and unload from there. This will be the main running line. And you can see how small an area this really left me with if I kept it to 60 by 60, really very little. And this would have to include all of the factory, all of the sidings. It was really quite limited. Then we have a retaining wall. Now this is probably too tall. I've made this a little bit too tall. The minimum clearance really, as you can see, I've drawn on here. We might be able to see that. The minimum clearance is much lower than the actual top of this, so that would probably be a lot lower than it is right now. But this would be the street level up here, and then if it fits in the camera, because we're running out of room here, we've got a bridge. Now I'm not sure if I'm going to use this or not. This is one of those dapole kits which I've modified slightly by making much finer, much thinner than it should be, because it's going at the back. It doesn't matter if it's the full proper scale or not, and no, you can't see it properly. And this bit will be somewhere up here. It's still not quite tall enough, and I'm hoping that will be the highest point on the layout. It will go over the top of the buildings that are here. It will be a shuttle hidden from view at both ends, so hopefully that gives an idea of the real stepped nature that I'm going for here as well. Okay, so the next stage is building up the actual baseboard, which I'm going to show you next. But before we move on to that, I just want to explain some of my rationale behind what I'm doing. So I'm going to use these bits of wood to create a framework which will go underneath this top and secure it and keep it strong, sturdy, rigid, and raise it up enough so that any mechanisms underneath the board will be sufficiently protected. Now, because I've got layers on here, because this board goes up in the layers I've just shown, I need to think about that now. What I could do is I could literally make a riser like I've done over there. I could put all of this up here and keep it higher up and just artificially raise it up with bits of, I don't know, bits of foam or card or all sorts. But what I really want to do is maintain the board as the track bed. I don't want to increase this depth, and there's one reason for that, and that's because of things like points. If I decide to put a point motor on this, and I'm not entirely sure if I will do that yet, I may or may not, I want to be able to have this depth. I don't want that up underneath some foam and having to try and dig around and get at a point motor. So my plan, I'm going to cut along this line. Now I've drawn a straight line here. I will need to revise this to fit my new plan. I'm going to make that slightly angled, but I'm going to cut that off. And what I will do is I'll use this much taller bit of wood here. This is about 7 centimeters across here and about 1.8 round about that thickness. And this other one is more like 3, I can't remember what it is. It's about 3.4. but also 1.8 that way, so they're about the same thickness. And the idea is, and you can see here the difference in height, these are what is going to help me to step this board down. So the front is going to be lowered, the rest of it is going to be higher, and then that will allow the track in the middle to be laid directly on this board, whereas the rest at the back, which is largely scenic anyway, is going to be raised up on some bits like some foam and stuff like that, which I will get to when we get to that point. So if we imagine this is now the underside of the board, that is what will run along the back and down the sides as well. And then when this piece comes along the side, it will be cut out along here, so sort of step down. And then this long thin piece will be the bit that goes along the front and allows this front canal section to be dropped lower down. And then everything in the middle will be kind of filled in with scenic stuff. I'm not sure if that makes sense visually, but trust me, I will move on next to cutting these pieces up, and I will show you exactly how I formed this board. I may find that I need to put a piece down the middle here as well. It's mostly going to be a frame around the outside, but because this is now much longer than I envisioned the board being originally, there will probably have to be another bracing strip going down the middle as well. So I will have to make sure I've got enough wood to make sure that can happen. So let's get this stuff outside, let's get cutting, and let's make ourselves a baseboard. Okay, before we begin, I'd like to issue a general apology to any carpenters or people with even the most basic woodworking skills. I'm so sorry. In order to create the dropped section where the canal will go, I needed to separate that part from the surface board, so I cut this along the line I had drawn previously using a general purpose saw. When cutting long sections like this, try to support the offcut so it doesn't shear off at the end and damage the wood. An old table or collapsible workbench helps with jobs like these. Depending on the cuts required, some hardware stores can cut wood to size for free, if you ask. A quick skim with some sandpaper helps to remove any burrs and tidy up the edges. I decided to cut all the pieces I would need so I could lay them out and test how they would fit. First, the batten that runs along the rear length of the board. Using a tape measure, I made the necessary measurements. As my dad always says, measure twice, cut once. A pencil and set square help to make a nice straight line. Once this piece of wood is cut, I offer it up to the board and check the sizing. Too big and I'll need to take some more off. Too small and, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Next, the shorter battens are measured and cut in the same way. I have 3 in total. Because they butt up against the longer piece, they'll need to be slightly shorter than the overall width of the board. A quick test fit again, and it looks good. If we have pieces that will be the same length, I like to check each one against the previous piece, but try to avoid using these as an actual template and always measure accurately each time using a ruler or a tape measure, as any discrepancies in the cut will only get repeated or even magnified. The long batten runs the entire length of the rear of the board, and the shorter battens butt up against it. However, I decided the long front batten should fit within the shorter pieces, as that would make the most secure connection for my timber choices, as shown here. The front piece is measured and cut. Laying all the pieces out means you can spot any errors early, although having already cut the wood it would still be too late. It's all looking good so far, and I'm getting a better idea of how it will all come together. I actually forgot to compensate for the central batten needing to be slightly shorter. That's no problem, I'll just trim it back. As my barber says, he can take it off but he can't put it on again. This central batten helps add stability to the whole board, especially where it is longer than it is wide. Normally I'd aim to put the central batten dead centre, but it can be a problem if you intend to mount anything below the baseboard, such as point motors, wiring or other mechanisms. That's where my printed track plan really helps. I just bring it in, lay it over the top, and it shows very clearly that both the Y turnout and the wagon turntable are going to be sitting nicely either side of a central brace, so it shouldn't be an issue. That's a bit of luck, really. Had this not worked out, I would have just offset the batten slightly, or if it really wasn't going to work out, I could have used 2 either side instead. Another thing I highly recommend doing at this stage is to make allowances for any wires that will need to pass from one side of the board to the other. I've previously neglected this step and had to awkwardly drill holes once the board was already built. I'm cutting V shapes in the wood, which should give plenty of clearance for a good amount of wire types and sizes. You could also just drill a series of holes instead. I made a bit of a mess of this, and maybe I used the wrong saw, but I think the final result is okay and will certainly do the trick. Remember, the side with the V cutouts face upwards when the board is correctly orientated. It's very easy to lose track of which way up everything goes at this stage. If in doubt, use a pen or a pencil to clearly mark the correct way up for each piece. To accommodate the dropped section, some areas of the battens need to be cut out to lower them to the required height. This saves joining many smaller pieces which would have only weakened the whole structure. I use the cutaway section of baseboard as a template to mark how far along these cuts need to be at each end. Since the dropped section is at an angle, this will vary. The overall height of the drop section is dictated by the batten that will run along the front, which obviously it needs to match. The angled board does introduce some slightly angled cuts, but they're simple enough to pull off with some clear markings. Time for another test fit. At this stage, you could make the overall frame and add the baseboard to the top afterwards, but I don't really trust my cuts to be that straight, so I'm opting to secure each piece to the underside of the baseboard top, something I know to be straight and true. I started with the long batten at the back. First, a line of PVA wood glue, you don't need too much. Then I press the batten into place, making minor adjustments until I'm happy. These clamps help to keep it in place and aligned. Ideally, you want to do this on a nice, flat, stable surface. I'm doing my best with a pair of A-frame trestle legs and some spare wood as support. I turned the whole board over and started the process of marking, drilling, and countersinking ready for screws. Countersinking stops the screw heads from sitting proud of the surface, which could otherwise cause problems later on. I aim for an even spread of fixings along the batten and use screws that will pass a decent amount through both pieces of wood. I prefer screws over nails or tacks because sometimes I've needed to drill through the battens only to find a screw right in my way. Using screws means you can take them up later on and conveniently relocate them further along the batten. The same process is repeated for each of the two side battens. I also popped a couple of screws into the vertical faces to keep them square against the adjoining battens. You can see one of the drawbacks of using plywood here. It's prone to disintegrating at cut edges. You probably wouldn't get this if you used tacks, and I'm sure the countersink bit isn't exactly gentle. I am drilling quite close to the edge here too. Still, I can fill these in later and they won't be seen or cause any structural issues. At this stage, I tested the fit of the batten for the front edge. It was a little loose, but once screwed in place, the two ends would pull together. I decided to add the dropped baseboard top first. This would make it easier to secure the batten underneath. 2 screws at each end did the trick. They had to be shorter than the ones used previously, as the battens are much smaller here. A clamp helps to keep the piece in place while drilling. And the same process for that front batten. A line of glue, some clamps to hold it in place, marking out for the holes, drilling, countersinking, and finally securing with screws. Don't forget to wipe away any excess glue that may have leaked from the joins. Turning the board over, I can focus on that final central batten. I had drawn a central line down the baseboard top at the very beginning, but I never thought to do this on the underside. It would have helped a lot in getting this piece aligned perfectly. I marked it as best I could at this stage, applied some glue, aligned the batten with the centre marks, and clamped one end so it wouldn't fall out. Ask me how I knew to do this. Then it was a case of 2 screws in the front and a series of screws spaced along the length. One thing I forgot here was the triangular cutouts beneath. There's one right in the centre, so it's not really the best place for a screw. I re-drilled for 2 fixings either side of the centre instead. And here's the finished baseboard. Now, I won't be winning any awards for this construction, but it is sturdy and functional. I'm planning a tunnel for the canal on the lower section, so it's good to know that there's just enough clearance for a scale narrowboat to pass through, although I did make sure this was the case when selecting my timber. Although you may not want or need a drop-down section on your baseboard, I hope this helps to show how a basic baseboard could be constructed. For longer boards, just add as many lateral braces as you need to prevent warping or sagging. And I think that about wraps it up for today's video. I'm quite happy with the progress that I've made on this build so far, and I really hope that you'll continue to join me in upcoming videos, because I very much intend for this to become a series and to chart the progress of this layout from its very beginning right through to its eventual completion as well. So do keep an eye out for those, but these videos do take time to make. I'm basically using my spare time to do any modelling or any of this video creation. The making and the editing do take time, so I can't promise any specific schedule for videos coming out in the future, but do keep an eye out for them. They will be my top priority, but you will potentially see some other stuff popping up in between. Doesn't mean I've gone and forgotten about the layout, but it does mean that I'm trying to use my time as wisely as possible to keep some really interesting model railway content coming out to you. Now, again, I'd love to hear your thoughts and your input, so please do share them in the comments below, and also follow me on Instagram and join the Fish Plates and Scratch Builds Facebook page for more updates and more content and ways to interact with me as well. So, until then, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. I really appreciate you being here to share it with me, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.